Um, so I just wanted to, I have much at all to say today, other than this, that, so Angel, you and Patrick are here representing the cohort. I'm just going to throw this out there. The classes that we've held, the sessions that we've held so far have been valuable, you would say, correct? I mean, this is not like a direct examination. I'm not trying to treat you as a witness on a in a jury trial. But I'm saying that because Neil, if you haven't met Neil before, Neil Davis is. It's hard for me to speak about this guy. He was a figure in the community when I started my own startup, a figure that I, wanted to know and got a chance to meet, and then became very important because of his role at TEDco. But he's so much more than that. He would come hang out at ETC. He would just freely talk to folks, and then he became a friend, and then a colleague. And then he became my mentor in a way. Now with this program, Neil and I worked together to put the curriculum together for this program. And when sort of the confluence of all of the issues relating to the relevance of Accelerate Baltimore, the combination of the interest with Hack Baltimore and Delali and the work that he's been doing in the community, the interest in moving ETC in a new direction, and making this program relevant to Baltimore, the willingness to reach across and create bridges between the Black community, the tech community. Neil has been the microphone in my ear at times. He has been a bridge builder and an influencer in this community, in this town. He is an influencer in the scientific community, and is now going to be instrumental in helping new and bright new students coming through graduate programs and becoming scientists and entrepreneurs, to help the world be a better place. Because of Neil, hundreds and hundreds of companies are here doing well and thriving in this world because of his mentorship and leadership and just the friendly, open nature. But more than that, it's just, he doesn't pull punches. He just speaks it as it is. But he's not, he doesn't carry it on he's not going to be stone faced. Remember we were talking yesterday about you talk to an investor or someone and they just just give you that nothing back. I am so happy to have Neil. I convinced Neil to actually do a presentation during the program and not just be, the sage on my shoulder, and to actually get a chance to have him interact with you and hopefully everyone else. And, for now, and at least because we're doing it by video, the whole world, if the world were able to watch this on YouTube, but to get Neil actually in the mix and his voice in your head for this session, because it's something he really cares about, something that he recognizes the utility of. And so I'm really happy and proud that he's that guy and that he took that time and that interest in working with me and working for this program and helping to make it a success. He made me feel confident and put in this whole volunteer effort, and he has put it in just like me. And so I just wanted to take this moment to just really give that kind of a shout out to him, like I have not done for anybody else, because he is that guy.
Well, thanks, John. That's super nice. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.
Really appreciate it. I think it was University of Maryland. You did a session on financial projections.
Oh, that's right.
And
Yeah.
I was in there.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
Asking you questions about, should I
Yeah.
have financial projections if I'm pre-traction and
Right.
all of that.
Yeah.
You gave me some very helpful advice that I put to use. So
Well, that's great. So you'll get I think you'll get a new and improved version of that story today, I hope. Hopefully anyway. So we'll see.
Thanks, Neil. The floor is
Good.
yours, sir.
All right. So I think what I need to do here is share my screen. And I think when I do that, I'm gonna lose the ability to see you guys, but you'll be able to see my my screen. So let me make sure I do the right thing here. Hang on a second. Yeah. Okay. Let's see here. I want to make sure I do this right. No, wait a minute. Here's what I want to share. Yeah, here we go. Wait a minute.
Ooh.
Okay. Oops. Oops, wait a minute. Hold on.
There we go.
Okay, so you got the PowerPoint now?
Yeah, we do.
Okay. And you're seeing it full screen, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so.
We see, there we go. Got it.
Okay.
We're on you. Thanks.
Okay, so great. So if you have any trouble, we did a dry run on this last week and it worked out just fine. So if you have any trouble, let me know and we'll blame Celine. Okay, so the whole idea here today is to really build upon a lot of the work you guys have been doing over the past 8 or 9 weeks, and specifically the whole idea of using your customer discovery efforts and what we used to call market research, and what you learn in those efforts, and link them to this particular element of the business plan, to the description of your market, and to the creation of a set of financial projections that'll be meaningful to investors and to other people who want to see what you're saying about your business. Okay. And when I say customer discovery, you've been through the I-Core process. You saw Dan Kunitz talk, I think, in the first week. That's really powerful stuff. But it's more than that. It's things like taking advantage of the fact that the emerging technology centers has probably worked with every possible startup business model you can imagine over the past 10 years. So it's extremely likely that you'd be able to, through Deb and through Celine and through John, network with other entrepreneurs who have employed a similar business model to yours, and you can get valuable insights from them as to certain key performance indicators or go-to-market plans or sales channels that they found successful, and you can draw upon that information to make your story that much better. You can also take advantage of free resources. For example, at TEDCO, TEDCO has made access available to people across the entire state to some really expensive but powerful business-related databases, and you can access those databases through TEDCO, either at the TEDCO office or, depending where you are in the state, at terminals at places like Johns Hopkins Fast Forward, or out in Montgomery County at Montgomery County Community College. So when I mention customer discovery, when I mention market research, I don't just mean I-Core. I mean I-Core, I mean free resources, I mean networking, and I mean talking to friends and other entrepreneurs who are doing the same thing that you guys are doing, or similar things. Okay, so let's dive in here, and just to kind of level set what we're going to talk about today. Like, you are the target attendee or listener for this presentation, the startup entrepreneur. And John, we'll make sure everyone gets copies of this PowerPoint.
Yep.
Okay, we don't want people to have to take voluminous notes while they're listening. This is not about preparing budgets and forecasts. That's something you'll have to do once your business matures. And that's a whole different process than making these projections, okay? We're gonna talk about the basics, talk about the process. I'm gonna work through an example with you, a real life example, and try and illustrate how this all fits into your investor pitch or your sales pitch. That's the critical element of what we're trying to talk about here. I'd like to keep it informal. The group's pretty small. So John, maybe if you can moderate the chat.
Yep.
And if we have, I guess, questions that are relatively straightforward, let's address those in real time. If we have like an essay question, let's hold that for the end, and then we can kind of address that in more of a conversational way, okay?
Got it.
Now, I always like to start with 4 basic rules. And these are intended to be instructional, but also maybe a little bit humorous as well. So rule number 1, and this is the bad news. Yes, you actually do have to prepare financial projections in this particular investment market. The Mid-Atlantic market is relatively conservative. It's not California, it's not Boston, okay? And an investor deck or a pitch deck that doesn't include an analysis of your market size and a set of financial projections will not look right, okay? So you do have to do this, whether you want to or not. And the fact that you've read about a startup that raised $20 million and never had projections, or that you heard that Y Combinator doesn't require projections anymore, that's not really germane to this market. Unless you're a close personal friend of Beyonce or Serena Williams or Ashton Kutcher, and they're willing to write you a check for $1 million on the strength of that friendship, or if your aunt and uncle are fabulously wealthy and they're willing to write you a check for $1 million to get you out of their hair, you're going to have to go through this process. And I don't think I've yet to meet any entrepreneurs who are close personal friends of Serena Williams or who have wealthy relatives who are able to fund this seed investment that we all need. So rule 1, you got to do it, get over it, and learn how to do it. Rule 2 is, this is not accounting. We're not talking about accounting. We're talking about an essential business skill that you as an entrepreneur have to have. It's the same as being able to pitch. It's the same as being able to sell, right? This is one of your essential toolkit skills that you all have to at least be decent at. So accountants prepare historical financial projections. They tell you what happened last month, last quarter, or last year. Analysts prepare budgets and forecasts for what might happen next month, next quarter, or next year. But those 2 functions use actual operating data to make those reports and those projections. Business people like yourselves, you're preparing financial projections. Whether you work for a large company and you're starting up a new product line, or you're entering a new market, or you're entering a new geography with your business, the people that prepare those projections are the business leaders in the companies, not the accountants and analysts, okay? So, well, like I said, it's an essential skill. You've got to do it. Is there a role in this process for an accountant? I kind of don't think so, right? A lot of times I'll talk to an entrepreneur and have over the years, and he or she would say, I've got my projections. I want to have my accountant check them over. I don't think that makes any sense. I don't think that's a logical thing for you as a business person to want to do. So rule number 2, we're not talking about accounting. You don't need a degree in accounting. There's no financial accounting standards board or generally accepted accounting principles that work here. These are business projections. Rule number 3 is these things are never going to be correct. Period. End of conversation. But they have to make sense. They have to be logical, and they have to be grounded in assumptions that will stand up to questioning. So investors are always going to look at your projections and discount them because they know you're entrepreneurs and you're unspeakably optimistic. They have to be big enough to matter, right? If you're projecting to do $250,000 of sales in year 5, well, you're not really a candidate for venture capital. So these projections have to be big enough to matter. And we'll talk more about that later. They really are a reflection about all your assumptions about the business, dressed up to look like a profit and loss statement. So your business plan, your executive summary, your elevator pitch, your investor pitch, and these projections are all different ways of telling the same story. They all have to integrate together. It doesn't make any sense for your executive summary to say you're raising $1 million and for your projections to indicate you only need to raise $200,000. The stories have to be congruent, they've got to be the same, and they have to reinforce one another in different ways. And if those of you who remember back into your math or chemistry tests, right, you always got partial credit for your work, right? Even if the answer came out wrong, you get partial credit. And this is kind of the same thing. Like the answer is important, but how you got there and the logic of your thinking as a business person is, in this case, probably even more important in the eyes of the investor, okay? Final rule, rule number 4, and this is, I can't overstate the importance of this enough. The end goal here is to be discussing your assumptions with the investor, not talking about the actual numbers. And using your customer discovery efforts can help you get there, okay? You don't want to be getting in an argument over the fact that you've said your year 3 sales are $8 million. You want to be in a discussion about the assumptions that got you there. Mm-hmm. What did you assume for sales productivity? What did you assume for the role of manufacturers' reps? How did you arrive at 80% gross margin in year 3 versus 84 in year 2? Those are all some assumptions that if you follow this methodology and use your customer discovery work, you can answer those questions, and develop a real rapport with the investor that's going to lead to the next step. An in-person meeting, some early due diligence, some final due diligence, and hopefully, them stroking a check. Okay, those are the 4 rules. So keep those in mind. They're a little bit whimsical, but they really do make a lot of sense. Now, how do we know about this investor behavior relative to seed stage financial projections? Or is this stuff that everyone just makes up and guesses at? And is it all just like tribal knowledge that people pass down from person to person? Well, that's a part of it. But there's also been some relatively scholarly work done in this area as well. And I'm going to use some of that work over the course of the next few slides to give you a sense for this. A couple years ago, a startup called DocSend and the Harvard Business School collaborated on a study of 200 Series Seed and Series A startups. Now, these startups had raised nearly $400 million. And what this study did was to quantify learnings about investor behavior, specifically as relates to the pitch deck, right? It's amazing stuff. I'll give you a few examples. what the study found was that the typical investor deck was viewed for the first time for an average of 224 seconds, right? So 3 minutes and 44 seconds. Now we're talking about the README deck here. We're talking about the deck that you send to an investor when you meet her at a networking event, and you kill your elevator pitch. So she wants to see a deck. She'll spend less than 4 minutes looking at that. Harvard Business School and DocSend found that 12% of these decks were viewed on a mobile device for the first time. So you kind of have to make sure your deck holds up on an iPad or a mobile phone. They also found that entrepreneurs who quit trying to raise money quit in about half the time that it actually takes on average to close a round. I thought that was an amazing statistic. Most people just quit too soon. And lastly, the average seed or Series A round took about 58 investor contacts and 40 meetings before the deal closed. Now, you can look at this two ways. I think that's a pretty optimistic number because some people say you've got to talk to hundreds of investors to get a deal. It's not hundreds. At the same time, it's not 3. Okay, so you have to be prepared to have this be a fairly full-time commitment on your part as the leader of this startup. Right? It's not an impossible task, but it's a non-trivial task at the same time. Now, let me show you some of the things that this study came up with. Here's an interesting chart here. And what this you can look at this at your leisure after this is over. But what this information indicates is that for the most part, investor decks consisted of the same slides. Purpose, problem, solution, why now, market size, etc. However, they found that not every slide was present in every pitch. Okay, so if you go all the way to the bottom right-hand side, you'll see that only about 60% of those 200 decks included financial projections. Now, I said earlier that we're in a conservative market in the Mid-Atlantic area. So my guess is that 58% is probably more like 90% or more in our market, okay? The only common thread among all these 200 decks was the fact that every single one had a team slide. You'll see that on the lower line there, 2 from the left. Okay. Market size also very common. Top right, 73% of the decks had that. Once again, in our Mid-Atlantic market, a conservative market, that's probably going to be darn close to 100%. Now, here's the interesting thing I think is totally fascinating. This next slide indicates of that 3 minutes and 44 seconds, how much time was spent on each of the topics. And you'll see at the top that for those decks that included the financial projections, investors spent the most time on that information. I think that is a very telling learning. I think it supports the fact that investors want to see if the entrepreneur can speak in these terms. Yeah, the pitch is great. The elevator pitch was compelling. I like the way the entrepreneur presents himself or herself. But is that entrepreneur enough of a business person to show me a reasonable, believable set of projections? I thought this was really fascinating information. And it goes back to something I've been saying for years and years. And that is very simply that at the seed stage, when you talk to an investor, there is a presumption on the investor's part that your technology works and that you can execute. What they really want to see is, if that's true, what does the business look like that is formed around that technology? And that answer is going to be embodied in the projections. And that's why I think people spend so much time on them. Now, once they're interested, once they're falling in love with your business, they'll come back around to whether the technology makes sense. They'll due diligence that. They'll check your team. They'll really grill you about your qualifications as far as your ability to execute. But to get to that point, you've got to convince them that there's a meaningful business that can be wrapped around this technology that makes sense. Okay, those are some of the things that this DocSend Harvard Business School study surfaced that I thought were particularly interesting given today's topic. Now, what are we talking about here? We're really talking about your checkbook. It's cash in minus cash out, okay? You need to estimate revenues, the sales derived from selling your product or service, the cost of goods sold, direct expenses associated with those products and services, your gross margin, simply the difference between those two, selling, general, and admin costs, that's everything else, your salary to the extent you're paying yourself. And what's left over are your earnings before interest and tax, or your cash flow at the company level. Depending on the kind of business you're running, you might include some R&D costs or some capital expenditures, but typically there's not much CapEx in a early stage startup, and your R&D is fairly modest. Once you do all this, you can then quantify your investment needs, and that number and the timing of it should tie back to what you're asking from the investor. In a nutshell, these projections are simply a mashup of your market research, all your operating assumptions, and your specific go-to-market strategies. Now, there's always one more little thing, and that's the segue into the market size and the revenue line. So many times investors will be told, well, it's a huge market. I need a really small piece of it to generate $35 million of sales in the fifth year. That macro top-down approach is just not acceptable, because no one, including you and your team, can assess whether your execution plan is reasonable and whether you can execute. All right. And that's an important point. You're not just doing these projections for investors. I think you're also doing them for yourself and for your team. It's a great way to identify where you should focus, where you should target, and what key performance indicators you should be using to measure yourselves as a team, not simply presenting to an investor to try and induce him or her to cut you a check. Okay? So let's go through an example that I think will be really meaningful. So let's assume for a moment that I am an entrepreneur in the K-12 education space. I'm the next teacher. I've got a technology co-founder, and lo and behold, my local district has already agreed and is in the process of piloting my technology. So I'm on my way. Now I have to begin to pull together some projections and an investor deck so I can begin to grow this business, right? I've got a couple options here. Option one, and these are more or less real numbers. I can say to myself that over $600 billion is spent every year on K-12 education. And if I get 0.1% of that, I'm in a $600 million market. Okay, that sounds pretty good, right? Option two is I could say and get more granular and say that over $95 billion is spent every year on K-12 education technology. Well, if I get only 0.6% of that, it's a $600 million market. Sounds great, right? So what's wrong with this approach? What's wrong with it is it doesn't demonstrate that you understand your market. And it leaves you open in a pitch to potentially unanswerable questions. It doesn't indicate the scope of the sales problem. Do you need to get one customer, like one really big one? Do you need 10? Do you need 1,000 or 1,000,000? Because the answer to that question, how many customers do you need, drives a whole different set of decisions. Is it a direct sales model? Is it a value-added reseller model? Is it a manufacturer's rep model? Is it a strategic partnership model? Or is it a blend of all four, or three of them, or two of them? You can't answer that question if all you've done is a simple top-down analysis. It doesn't indicate whether the founding team can generate the early traction that's required. If you need 30,000 customers, you as a founding team can't do that. If you need 3 to start, you should be able to do that. So it leads you into the appropriateness of your sales channels and whether or not your sales compensation plan is at all appropriate. And lastly, it doesn't generate the marketing key performance indicators that can be used to manage the sales efforts. You're really just shooting in the dark. You're taking a big number, multiplied it by a small percentage, and you come up with a kind of a big number that you're then going to go and try and drive your team with, but it doesn't work that way. So what do you do instead? Well, here's the approach that I like to promote, and I'm going to follow this example, and we'll see if it makes sense to you guys. Because investors want to see a bottoms-up micro approach. It starts with the customer, uses customer segmentation, leverages your customer discovery, and as a consequence, is much more meaningful to you and your team. All right? Doesn't cost anything. No one's asking you to go out and hire a market research firm, right? Because you're using the customer discovery we talked about earlier. iCore, networking, ETC's connections, and free resources like, for example, the TEDCO databases. So it's a funny story that I always like to tell during this presentation. It's old, but it's still humorous. And that there was a rather prominent VC was taken a task in a blog post that he had done by several entrepreneurs who said, hey, you keep talking about market research, you talk about customer discovery. I can't afford to go out and hire a market research firm to do this work. And the VC simply replied, what, comma, don't you have any friends? And the intention there was to say, no one wants you to spend money. They want you to talk to people. They want you to network. They want you to talk to your peers. And they want you to leverage free resources. So how does this option number 3, this bottoms-up approach, actually work? Well, I like to start by segmenting the market. And I've done that here to illustrate for you guys in this example. I've followed through with the K-12 market segmentation. If you recall, I said there were, I think it was a $600 billion total spending, $95 billion spent on technology. I don't care about that. Let's drill into this from the bottom up. So I've taken the time here to break this market, these 16,000 districts, into 4 market segments. The mega districts, Chicago, LA, et cetera, with over 125,000 students each. Large districts, Baltimore, Jacksonville, places like that, 20,000 to 125,000 students. Medium-sized districts, Frederick, Altoona, Pennsylvania, places like that. There's a ton of them, over 7,000 of them, between 1,000 and 20,000 students. And lastly, the small rural districts, lots of them, 8,600, and they have over less than 1,000 students. So I've taken a crack here at looking at this market in a segmented way, so I can begin to deal with it in a more intelligent fashion. Then I've used my connections, I've used my I-Core work, I've used my discussions with my fellow entrepreneurs to find out that these segments pay for services similar to mine in different ways. And that was a major customer discovery finding for me as an entrepreneur. I didn't know this. And I found that the big guys want to pay for it and a flat annual fee. The large guys want a small fee plus a per student per year fee. The medium and the small people want to pay purely per student per year. And the small companies, the small schools, pardon me, will pay a little bit more. That was good. That was good to know. I found this all from customer discovery, okay? Talking to people, interviewing folks, talking to other K-12 ed tech entrepreneurs. And now I can actually calculate based on the size of these segments and the way they like to pay for things. I can calculate the value of each segment. And when I did this, I came up with some really counterintuitive results. The mega districts, not that big a segment. The large districts, bigger but not that big. The medium districts is where the money is, almost $400 million. And the small districts, although there are a lot of them, because there are no students there, simply it's not that big of a market either. So now I have this interesting learning about my market that frankly, your investors don't have. So right now you know more than they do. And that's a good thing because when they begin to ask you questions, you're smarter than they are. You already know the answers to the questions they're going to ask relative to your market, how it's constructed, and how it's built up, and what the resulting value is. Okay, let me just digress for a moment or two here. I think this is an important point. Third line down, the revenue model for these districts. You've got enough trouble as an entrepreneur introducing a new service or a new technology or a new product into your customers. What you don't want to do is fight battles you don't have to fight. All right? If your customer is used to paying for something that's similar to what you're selling, and they pay for that in a certain way, it probably makes sense for you to use a similar revenue model. I always say that if a school district, is used to paying for pencils by the box load, that you shouldn't try and sell them erasers based on the number of erased words per month. That's just too much of a hurdle to get over, right? If your customer is used to buying from a manufacturer's rep, you probably don't want to try and push them into buying from a direct salesperson. You've got plenty of problems, plenty of issues generating adoption and traction without fighting battles you don't have to fight. So where it makes sense, learn the practices, learn how things are done now, and follow suit. Follow suit until you're big enough to institute change in those areas in such a way that'll make your situation better. Okay? So step one, we've segmented the market. We've applied our customer discovery learnings. We know what the value of these segments is, of each segment. And now we can begin to develop segment-specific strategies on how to tackle each of these 4 segments, okay? Well, before we do that, we've learned a lot already. You now know for a fact that you're operating in a $464 million market. You thought it was 600 when you applied your simple percentages, but now you know how big it is. And that, Angel, that's probably your TAM. That's your total addressable market, okay? You know which segments are most valuable. You can begin to build segment-specific sales strategies. You can now answer those investor questions like, why aren't you going after Los Angeles? Okay, you know the answer to that question. And lastly, you can choose your initial target segment or subsegment based on your current best product market fit. And to go back to one of my earliest slides, you're now fully armed to engage in a conversation about assumptions. And you aren't going to be engaged or able to do that if you simply follow options 1 and 2. Okay. Now I'm going to build my segment-specific strategies. And here's how I've done it, okay? My first strategy is to completely ignore the 20 largest districts until year 3. I've got good reasons for that. First of all, it's only worth $7 million to me. I know that. I know the sales cycle is painfully long. I know it's amazingly political. And I know these big school districts have contractors and consultants that are heavily embedded in those administration buildings. And I know that from my customer discovery efforts. And interestingly enough for me, if you recall, I said that my own district is going to pilot my technology. Well, that pilot is not in a district that's big enough to matter to these mega districts. Well, based on that, I'm going to put this off till year 3. My second strategy is I'm also going to ignore those 8,600 small school districts until year 5. Why? They're really operating on a shoestring. They're budget limited, they're staff limited, and the way my product exists right now, I've got to almost completely redesign it to meet their needs. And I don't have time to do that right now, nor the energy, nor the investment dollars. And lastly, my pilot that was deemed too small for the big guys is deemed overkill for these small guys. It simply won't resonate with them. My first strategy is ignore the big guys. Strategy 2, ignore the small guys. So far, so good, right? My fourth strategy, I'm going to ignore those medium-sized districts with the 1,000 to 20,000 students until year 2, okay? Because what I know is I've got to do some value engineering to hit that price point, right? I'm going to need some market presence to be able to tell my story better. And lastly, I've learned that these districts, these medium-sized guys, they buy almost exclusively from value-added resellers. And I don't have that network built yet, and I don't have the time to do it right now. So I've got to begin to build this network of resellers in order to tackle that medium-sized district customer segment. And I'm going to try and start that in year 2. My fourth strategy is I'm going to go after those 240, not mega, but large districts. And Angel, that's probably my service addressable market, okay? Those 240 large districts. My pilot project is perfectly suited because my pilot is one of them. Based on my current technology state, it's the best product market fit. And what I'm going to do further is I'm not going to focus on all 240. I'm going to focus on those 45 districts that are in urban settings where my own personal brand and network is most powerful. You know, I taught in a school district like that. I'm well known in those districts. I went to conferences, and I can get access to those 45 people fairly readily. And because of that, I, the entrepreneur, am going to take the responsibility to close the first 5 commercial sales in the first full year of operation. That's my fourth segment strategy. Now, what I don't want you to do, I don't want you to get too hung up on these terms these acronyms, TAM, SAM, SOM, because frankly, people use them in different ways, all right? So just know what you're talking about, know the different types of market, the target market, where you're going first, where you're going second, where you're going third. I think that's the most important thing. Various people will talk about TAM in different ways. They'll talk about SAM in different ways, the service addressable market, and then the service obtainable market. That's not the important thing. The important thing is the process of segmentation and of using your customer discovery process. Okay. Now we've got the markets sized, we've got them segmented, we've developed these segment-specific strategies. Okay. And if you're like me, I think you can probably begin to envision a relatively simple Excel spreadsheet that begins to build out your financial projections based on this information and based on your segment-specific strategies. Okay. Here's in a chart. It's a summary of how I'm going to go to market. Very simple. Year one, and this all ties back to these strategies we talked about over the past 5 or 6 minutes. Okay. Very simple summary. First year, I'm closing 5 deals in my target segment. Year two, I'm adding 2 salespeople in the target segment, and here are my assumptions on productivity. And I'm going to begin to select and train a couple of value-added resellers so I can tackle that next segment, right? Year 3, I'm going to keep adding salespeople and resellers as long as the productivity justifies it. And at the end of the year, I'm going to close a strategic alliance that will allow me to sell into those 20 big districts. Okay. And I've made assumptions on productivity. In year 4, I'm going to keep growing the large, the mega, the large and the medium sales process. And in year 5, and only in year 5, am I going to begin to undertake an R&D effort to make my product usable by those very small schools. Look what I'm doing. At a $464 million market, and I'm saying I'm going to take about 8% of that and not worry about it until year 5. It's not a killer, okay? And all my other strategies are designed to attack first the large segment, then the medium segment, then the mega segment. And only when I have the time and the energy and the desire will I go after those small schools. And so that's my tip, John.
So that's a good point there for Angel's question. You may see in the chat about the assumptions and asking what those assumptions are based upon, and does it matter? How does pricing strategy fit in there? I think it related to the strategy each year, and I totally understand the question. Why don't you address that if you could?
Yeah, so I can't see the chat. I'm sharing my screen.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But that's okay.
So the question, Angel, go ahead. You're unmuted. Go ahead and ask the question.
Yeah, when you talk about you're assuming 2 sales in the first year and 5 sales per year in future years. What are those assumptions based on, or does it matter? And then when you're targeting how many customers you need to acquire per year, how does your pricing strategy fit in there? And my other question will be later on about pricing strategy in general, but how does that fit in with this conversation about assumptions?
Yeah. Okay. So the assumptions. So let's go back. This is the right slide of this. So these assumptions can be based on a couple different things. Let's say, for example, that you, at a previous time in your life, ran a sales organization. So you know how long it takes to train a salesperson, how long it takes that salesperson to become effective as a salesperson, and you've relied upon that information to arrive at your assumptions. So in year 2, you see, I've said I'm assuming 2 sales in the first year and 5 sales per year thereafter. That may arise from my experience or the experience of one of my team members. That's one possibility. Other possibility is maybe I've talked to some of my fellow K-12 ed tech entrepreneurs, and I've asked them, how productive are your salespeople? And they've said to me, Neil, best case, you're going to get 7 sales per year. So I'm going to ratchet that back to 5, right? And then I'm going to ask my fellow ed tech entrepreneur who's already got customers, well, were your salespeople effective from the very beginning? Oh, no. It's really hard. They start out slow. Best case would be 2 to 3 sales in the first year. Okay, I'm going to assume 2. I want to be conservative. I don't want to be taken to task by the investors for always assuming the best case, right? So it gets back to this idea of talking to people, customer discovery, and gathering some information that's going to allow you to make these assumptions. Okay? Make sense?
Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay, that's all right. Okay, and then as far as the pricing goes, I mean, you can't arrive at a pricing model in a vacuum. Okay, you have to do some research to see what similar products are sold for, what similar services are sold for, what those revenue models look like, right? And then use that to come up with your pricing model. That's going to change. It's going to change almost every year. It's going to change on the fly. You'll never be right? You're always going to be evolving it and tweaking it and fixing it. But when you start out, you've got to have something that's grounded in what the customers are already doing, what they're already paying. Okay. And I think that comes through the stuff that Dan Kunis was talking about back in week 1. And it comes through talking to people in the field who've already gone down this road to a certain degree and what they've learned. You guys are in a really great market. Okay. People are, I always find that entrepreneurs in the greater Baltimore area in Maryland, they're always extremely willing to share learnings, to share ideas. There are roundtables you can join. There are places to gather with your fellow entrepreneurs and have these kinds of conversations. All right. I think, Angel, it's really a continual expansion and use of customer discovery. Okay?
That's exactly where I was going. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I wanted to have you expand on this concept of customer discovery, right? We started out and some of the cohort would talk about, well, this is my customer, or I only have 3 customers. Well, this concept that as you're discussing it today goes to customers as another company in the same space, another CEO in the same space that's been there 2, 4, 5 years longer than you, that can give you a roadmap to some lessons that they've learned.
Exactly.
It can be so customer in a very broad sense, so that you can use all of that information in order to shape your approach towards sales.
Yeah, it's like you're never done with your investor deck. Okay. Every time you pitch, you're always going to tweak your deck a little bit when you're done, and you're never done with customer discovery. It's not something you do for 8 weeks, in March and April, right? It's an ongoing process. You're always trying to learn more and more and more about what you're doing, how your customers buy, what your competitors do and don't do, right? You're always trying to learn more. And the way to do that is by being part of the community, being out there, and also then being willing to help those who come behind you with the same kind of information. And I find this Baltimore marketplace to be that kind of a market. Really, it's a great place for that. Okay.
And so, Neil, just before we
Yep.
move on, your perspective on the investors as it relates to this kind of projection with respect to, this. I found this segment strategy that you put here to be rather conservative, and you're saying that this kind of strategy, a sales strategy that you've outlined, fits in this market.
I think it does. Yeah. Now, this is one person's opinion. Okay. But I feel as though, I feel like these are great building blocks that other investors that will come in handy with other investors. Okay. And I've been through hundreds, maybe thousands of pitches, right? In person, read me, whatever. And so many times the pitch or the story falls apart because the entrepreneur either can't answer some basic questions, or answers them in a naive or an ill-informed way. And look, the sad truth of the matter is investors have to look for reasons to say no. Okay. They get 1,000 business plans a month. You can only invest in 2, right? Unfortunately, they're looking for reasons to say no. And if you can't explain why you've gone from $1 million in sales in year 2 to $8 million in sales in year 3 in a reasonable way, that's a problem. That might be a reason to simply say no and move on to the next 20 decks that you have to review between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. Right? So
yeah.
And furthermore, it's a way. It's always effective when the entrepreneur can control the conversation with an investor, can control the Q&A, can control the conversation. And if you have information like this in the form of backup slides to your deck, you can control the conversation. You can, when the first question comes up, Neil, I can't believe you're assuming that your salespeople will sell 5 deals a year. How is that possible? Oh, great question. Boom. Backup slide number 7. Here's my customer discovery. Yep. Here's my experience in running a sales team for 7 years for Bank of America, whatever, right? That allows you to control the conversation, as opposed to saying, well, 5 seem good to me. Well, if that's your answer, then I don't have any confidence in all your other numbers, right? I have no confidence. But if you can answer it with data, with customer discovery, and even if it's anecdotal, John, right? It doesn't need to be some voluminous chart, right? If you have any kind of backup, it allows you to control the conversation, and like it or not, it creates a presumption that, oh, this person knows what she's talking about, and the rest of the numbers must be solid. Okay, so that I think it's a good way to go. I really do.
You have. I've got more that I'd like you to talk about, but those are sort of essay questions. So
all right, let me. We're doing great here on time wise. So let me. Yep. So look, here are my strategies. And what I did was, so here are my strategies. All right, this is my sales strategy. This allows me to build out my top line, right, and my selling and general administrative expenses, right, and the rest of it's pretty simple. Okay. I've already used my market research to create these strategies. I've already used these strategies and assumptions to build up annual revenue projections in that Excel file I talked about. Your cost of goods sold, look, that's going to be something, that's a plug number, okay? Because if you're doing software, it's 80 to 85%. If you're doing medical devices, it's 45 to 50%, right? Those are easy numbers to find, right? And what you want to do is put a cost of goods sold or gross margin percentage in there that the investor is going to say, oh yeah, I get it. That's right. Right. And then you're going to use your assumptions about your segment specific strategies to build out your sales channels, your sales expense, and that builds out your annual SG&A along with rent and whatever else you have to pay. And bottom line is that allows you to calculate your earnings before tax and interest. And it's going to allow you to calculate and demonstrate what your investment needs are. So those are all shown on the next slide. I actually built up a set of projections. Did this quickly, trust me. I built these up from all the information in this example. And you know, John, a lot of people will want to present this in a really fancy chart with a lot of different colors, maybe a graph. I'll tell you what, once again, in this market, I think people like to see these numbers in a simple table. They don't need to interpolate, pardon me. They don't have to look sideways to see what the x-axis and the y-axis represent, okay? It's 5 years. I've given you an operating metric here at the top, which allows the investor to have a sense for how big this problem is. Oh, year 3, he only needs 55 customers. That sounds doable, right? In year 3, 4, 138, that sounds doable. They generate so much revenue. They come in at a gross margin, which looks right to me. And you know what? It's not the same every year, which it probably shouldn't be. So it indicates that Neil is thinking about how profitability changes as he goes into different segments. I've got gross margin. I've got SG&A. I've got some earnings. I'm spending a little bit of R&D here. If you remember back in my strategies, I was going to have to, value engineer my product, change it around for the small market. Those are all shown in here, right? And what it shows is that if I raise a seed or a small Series A round of 600K, I can cash flow this business from that point on, right? So I'm going to raise 600,000. I'm going to generate almost $14 million of sales in year 5. And all these numbers can be supported with a reasonable set of assumptions. And honestly, guys, I spent like 30 minutes on this. Now, it's not great, trust me, but it's not a 6-month-long project, okay? It's a relatively short-term thing that any one of you can do and knock out pretty easily. So here's the great stuff, right? This chart shows me how big the problem is, right? I need so many schools, not a big deal. It shows how much I'm raising, 600K, and that's in line with what my investor, to whom I'm presenting, likes to invest. And it shows that in year 4 and year 5, this is a $9 to $15 million business. That's big enough to matter. It's not a crazy number, like, you know, it's not $500 million, which shows that I'm naive. It's big enough to matter, but it's not so big that I'm crazy. And even if I'm off by 40%, it's still a pretty big number, right? That's what the investor is thinking, right? And he or she is looking at this information and saying to himself or herself, this fits within my investment thesis. I like to put $500,000 to $1 million to work. I want a business that's going to be about in the low 7 figures, pardon me, in 5 years. Yeah, I can get comfortable with this. And so I think this is sort of the capstone. This is what the capstone looks like of all your customer discovery stuff, all your assumptions. Remember, it's operating assumptions, go-to-market strategy, and customer discovery all kind of mashed together to form this picture of what you think the business will look like. And I, as an investor, when I was at TEDCO, I want to see an entrepreneur that can tell a story, tell the same story in this format as was told in a narrative format. Okay? Now, a few things to watch out for. I've talked about some of these already. All right. Oops, sorry. You don't want your gross margin percentage to be constant because it's not constant. As you get it more efficient, it's going to go up. As you discount to expand, it's going to go down. So when I did this, it starts out kind of low, it goes up, it goes down because I got to pay my resellers a piece of the action, and then it goes down further as those reseller sales dominate the revenue mix. So it goes up, it goes down. I've got reasons for that because they're all shown in this strategy slide. Why they go up, why they go down. Okay.
Yeah.
Please, this is my fervent plea to you. Use years, use actual dates, not year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. Okay. So many times an entrepreneur will indicate not 2020, but year 1. I can guarantee you the first question is going to be, okay, Neil, what's year 1? And a lot of times the answer is year 1's the year after I raised my first $2 million. That's not what investors want to know. They want to know what this business looks like starting right now. So, put dates up there, okay? Make sure you're using a gross margin percentage to calculate that gross margin dollars that is appropriate for your business, okay? Watch out for constant SG&A. It should not always be 7% of revenue. As you grow, that percentage decreases, okay? So investors know that, business people know that, okay? Make sure your SG&A goes in the right direction. And then please don't use multiples. It shouldn't be $1 million in year 1, $2 million in year 2, 4, 8, and 16. That looks like you're just guessing, okay? And then lastly, we talked about this early on. This is not accounting, okay? It's about burn rate, cash in, cash out. It's not about revenue recognition rules. It's not about how you recognize software revenues. There's no depreciation here, no amortization. Those are all non-cash expenses, right? This is about cash. Think of it, once again, think of this as your checkbook. You get so much money in on the 1st of March, so much money out through the month of March, you're left with $84. That's all there is to it. If you're left with minus 200, you got to ask your mom for a loan, okay? Get through the next month. It's as simple as that, okay? So a few things to watch out for, okay? Now, once you do this, you can go back and calculate your market share if you want to, because you know how big the total market was, 464. You know what your revenues are, and it should be a reasonably attainable percentage, allow for plenty of downside risk and opportunity on the upside if things break your way. In other words, not too large, not too small, just right. That old kid's fairy tale. Okay? And if you didn't notice, most of what we talked about here constitutes about 2/3 of your investor deck. Okay, your revenue model, your market size, okay, your projections, all those things constitute like 5 or 6 out of your 9 or 10 or 11 slides. Okay, so I think it's really important. It's important in this market more so than other markets. John, you're right. It might be a tad on the conservative side, but I believe the investors in this area are conservative. And if you don't provide it, they're going to ask for it. If you're lucky, if you don't provide it, they may not ask for it. They may not call you back. So I would err on the side of being conservative. I would do the work. I would build the projections. I would do the customer discovery. I'd make good assumptions, and I'd have those things all result in a solid set of financial projections. Okay?
Wow.
That's me.
Neil, I know that there were lots of questions from our cohort. I'm not sure everyone's real comfortable asking all the questions they may have. around the projections that and how you arrived at that final slide, because you know, we have not spent the same amount of time on how to get to that final slide, and speaking about the importance of that. So I want to you know, spend enough time on that, but there's also a number of other things I want you to address, and then I also want to make sure that Patrick and Angel and Muhammad and Omari and others who are here have an opportunity to ask any questions that they have. A couple of things. So do you have an overall sense of the investment market as it relates to the kind of verticals that we have in the cohort, right? You know, Muhammad and his team are in the ed tech space, dealing with, you know, 21st century technology. And, you know, I remember when we were doing the selection process, you had some comments about the ed tech space. Could you, you know, you heard Patrick is in the transportation. You know, Angel is really almost creating a whole new space, but it's really not. It's in the ratings. And so could you give an overview about the markets, the sort of verticals in terms of the markets, and how investors seem positioned in this market relative to those, as one question? And I got several more.
Okay, so I'll try and answer them. Let me try and answer them fairly quickly. So I think they're relative to the segments, or relative to the businesses that are in the cohort and what the investment climate is. I think there are two groups of investors I should talk about. So the traditional, the people that have been around for, you know, the past 10, 12, 15 years, right? They have a certain set of interests, right? We talked about this, John. You know, the Baltimore was a real ed tech hotbed, okay? Back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And what investors look for are returns, exits, right? And that segment hasn't generated those exits. I would say that the traditional investor is relatively cool on ed tech right now. But here, the good thing is, this is maybe a positive outcome of the COVID crisis. There are just tons of new investors coming to market, okay? And they are not burdened with some of these paradigms about whether or not certain verticals are interesting or not. They are far more interested in the entrepreneur himself or herself. They are far more interested in the story, and they want to follow and invest in and support new stories. And they are particularly interested, I think, in diverse and historically underrepresented founders. So if I were running one of these cohort companies, I would tend to spend less time with the traditional legacy investors in this market, and most of my time with the newer investors in this market, right? And I think if you did that, you'd be very happy with the outcome. Good
advice.
From what I can recall about these businesses, none of them need to raise $30 million, right? They need relatively small targeted raises.
All of them.
And I think that money is out there. I also think, and I don't want this to go unsaid, that in addition to the growth of these new funds, there is also a healthy growth on the impact investing side. So business models that are more, more social entrepreneurship related or focused are going to find a much more receptive market than they would even 3 years ago, when those folks were not in the market.
Gotcha.
So I am really optimistic. I think it's a great time for these kinds of businesses, and the opportunity that you got is to really tell a story that differentiates you from the other people that are trying to attract money from those new investors. All right.
And that story still has to have
Right.
that
That's
financial
how you
piece to it,
differentiate
though, right?
yourself.
You don't get away
That's
with
how
it.
you
Right,
differentiate
exactly.
yourself.
You still
right?
got to be
So you
tight
you
on the
take the approach
financials.
that you have to take with the legacy investor, you apply it to the new
Right.
investor, and that new investor will be blown away. So I'll
Right.
use an example. My
Right.
good friend, great friend, McKeever Conwell. Okay, new fund, new
Yep.
breed ventures. Mac and I have looked at hundreds of deals together. Right, I know what Mac's looking for in terms of a story. It's this, okay? But he's going to want to look for that story in a whole new set of founders. So, hey, give him what he wants. Learn from the legacy investors
Right.
and what they want, apply it to the new investor, and automatically you're at the top of the pyramid. That's what I think.
Know the mechanics.
That's
cold, right? And then apply your story.
Exactly.
I got you.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Know your business better than the investor thinks he or she knows
Mhm.
your business, and then control the conversation. Okay.
Can you talk? I was going to say,
Go ahead,
can
Angel.
you talk a little bit more about the whole exits idea with some of the new investors? Because I've had conversations with people, and I didn't realize how important of a topic that was. And it wasn't something that I had really thought about. And how much should we be thinking about that right now? And what, I guess, what should we be able to say or communicate at this point?
Yeah, that's really a good question, because I was talking to somebody about this just last week, about this whole idea of exit. So let me think about this for a second. So, okay, if a traditional investor puts $1 million into your business, that investor does so with the expectation that in 3 to 5 years, there'll be an exit. And they'll get their liquidity preferences, and they'll get their 7X, and they'll walk away with $8 million. And somebody will own, and Pfizer will own your business, right? So number one, you have to, in the back of your mind, be thinking that an exit is going to be necessary. However, I think that one of the interesting trends out there, especially among these newer investors, are different investment vehicles that aren't built upon an exit.
Like social.
I'll give you an example: revenue-based financing. All right, it's big. I'm telling you, I love this concept for a company that can get to revenue quickly and grow its customer base. It makes a lot of sense. So basically, you put the $2 million in as an investor. In year 3 or year 2, you begin to get a return that's based upon a percent of sales. And you put in 2, you get paid back 4.6, and that's when it caps out and the deal's done. That doesn't require an exit. It requires you to run your business and grow your business as a smart business person. The new investors will be more inclined to invest on that basis than somebody like Blue Ventures or one of these legacy guys. Okay, Angel? So you got to think about exit, but you also need to think about alternative investment vehicles that won't drive you towards an exit. A safe might be also one, John, because a safe, what's that? Secure agreement for future equity or something like that. A safe is essentially a convertible note with no term. So there's not this artificial, okay, in 2 years something has to happen. Okay, the safe is essentially an open-ended investment, which might not drive you toward a premature exit. Okay.
Got you. That was a good question, Angel. And it made me think about whether or not some of these companies like yours, that is really a
Yep.
social focus. And, the exit is, a society without racism. I mean, sounds like when we think that's going to happen, and what are you going to exit to, and what Pfizer is out there to take your company and going to, but the investors are really not looking at the social outcome as much as the investment outcome, and so you do have to speak their language.
You do. And we
nonetheless.
and so, Angel, we used to say, in a previous life, I used to do mergers and acquisitions for a Fortune 200 company, and people would call. They would call all the time. They'd say, Neil, what do I have to do in order for you to want to buy my business in 2 years? And my answer was always the same. My answer was, Angel, run your business like you're going to own it forever. And that's going to make it most valuable to me in a year or 2 or 3 or 5, if you ever want to sell, right? So adopt that ownership attitude, run it to grow it and own it. And in 3 years, John, who the heck knows? I mean, maybe Booz Allen wants to be in the space that Angel's in. And they don't want to go to the time and effort of standing up their own consultancy. They want to buy a consultancy that's been run intelligently, profitably, and has been grown by a committed, knowledgeable entrepreneur. Boom. Guess what?
Good point.
There's a deal.
Yeah.
There's a deal. Yep. It doesn't exist today, but it might exist in 3 years. And you, Angel, might be super happy to have Booz Allen pay you $50 million and then go run that consultancy for them for 2 years under contract, right? That could be a super good outcome for you.
Let me pivot to another sort of focus on the deck. What about the articulation of how you assess risk? Right? Do you and sort of like the risk assumptions that you make in the deck? Do you disclose that? How could you describe or discuss a little bit just where you disclose the assumptions you make or the risks that you're that you are telling the investor that there are in your business model? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I will. A lot of time. Well, not a lot. Maybe a quarter of the time, I will see an entrepreneur attempt to get to that by presenting worst case, likely case, best case, right? That is a phenomenal mistake because automatically the investor goes right to the worst case, right? So your likely case and your best case don't even matter. So I would say don't do that. Number one. Number two, investors know these are startups. They know there are risks. I am a person who's always advocated dealing with that in the Q&A, in the follow-up, not in the initial presentation. Okay, I think you put your best reasonably defensible foot forward. You tell that story.
Yeah.
You try and generate excitement around the story, and then that conversation about risk and what could go wrong, that's in the next meeting. So
let me just take it one step further, and just as a personal thing, but what if I got a skeleton in my closet, right? I mean, I can't say who doesn't, but I mean, a lot of entrepreneurs, you fail at stuff, and or you got child support payments, you got crap in your background. What does that come out? Does that come out during the deep dive? Sometimes people are scared, or you just don't know what to say to investors, or you get in front of a pitch and you want to tell your story or what part of your story. And the other thing is we don't want to look like them. That is to say, you know, our cohort doesn't look like most of the entrepreneurs that show up in front of these investors, right? We're, in our 40s or 30s or 50s, Black, brown people. And so I don't want to sound like, and we don't look like that. I feel like there's a difference, right? In that all my life I've had to feel like I need to do more to get to the same level, right? And so I feel like that same thing is on me now, and I have to be better. I have to do more, and that kind of weight is on my shoulders. It felt like it was always on my shoulders when I was trying to raise money in this conservative environment. Can you? I know you can't give me the answer to that, but can you talk to that?
Let me try to. So here's the fact of the matter. Okay, I can absolutely guarantee you, right, that while you're pitching, this is in the first pitch, and this happened at TEDCO every single time somebody pitched, right? Happens in every investor. Somebody in that audience is looking at your LinkedIn profile. They are Googling you. They are listening with one ear and they're looking with another ear. And they're looking for a way to learn more about you. All right. So if you spent 2 years at working for the city of Baltimore, their first question is going to be, hey, it looks like you worked for the city of Baltimore from 2004 to 2007. Did you know George Baylock, right? Or did you know Fred Smith? Or did you know Susie Smith? Because these are all people that this investor can call and talk to about you, right? That's a given, right? People are that's a fact, okay? So if you've got a track record of 3 failed startups, you're going to have to spin that to your benefit. What did you learn? Why are you different?
Exactly.
And why are you going to kill this one? Okay. I mean, look, this is something, look, and I know that we're talking about this is a sensitive, difficult issue, but I mean, this is another essential business skill, right? I mean, the company I worked for, 30 years ago, we had a series of like disasters. Okay. And they were high profile. And we used to embrace those. We embraced those to say, you know what? We learned so much from these technology disasters that we're now positioned to be the only person to solve your problem. Nobody knows this problem like we do, because we lived it. I can show you the scars, on my back, and my chest and my head from working through these issues, right? So you have to, if you've got that skeleton, John, you have to embrace it, and you have to use it to enhance your story, because you can't cover it, you can't hide it. Okay, it's going to come out in due diligence. You're going to have to sign if you're going to do a deal. And you know this, John. You're going to sign a 3-page list of reps and warranties, right? And you got to sign that honestly, right? Criminal convictions, SEC violations. You collaborated with the Yemeni government on arms sales. You're going to have to disclose all that stuff. So I think it's the old burst the balloon, right? I mean, I wouldn't put it in my investor deck, but I'd be ready to burst the balloon if it comes up in Q&A.
Right.
And if it doesn't, you got to know it's going to come up at some stage of due diligence.
Got to get ahead of it.
That's what I think.
Right. And use it. Mm-hmm. I went off on a tangent. Patrick and Angel, other questions that you might have about the deck or about how to. I'm sorry.
I hear you, John. So I don't know. Can you hear me, Neil?
Can you hear
me?
me?
You guys hear me?
No.
Yeah. Yes.
We can hear you. We all hear you.
It does that from time to time. You have to like refresh your browser. Oh, he can't hear me say that.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat.
Let me.
Yeah, if he just goes to like the search bar and just kind of just hit enter, it'll refresh itself. He'll be able to hear him. He'll be able to hear us, rather.
Okay. Look at your look down there, down there at the.
I'm not hearing you, John. Sorry.
How do I get to the chat?
Yeah, I put it in the chat.
Chat. CHAT.
See.
C H. He's doing it. He's doing it. Oh, what's that? That's that was good. That was good.
Yeah, I mean, I think this whole topic, I mean, this was great just to kind of understand, like, what is the strategy behind trying
Yeah.
put together these numbers, so that don't seem like, they just came out of thin air.
Yeah.
Well, like he ran through them kind of fast. I just want to make sure you really got them, because if you get it like that, I mean, once you get that down, man, it makes a big difference. And then the example that he used, Muhammad, by using school districts like that, I was like, whoa,
that's right down my alley, actually.
Yeah, you can start putting that together and just really building it out, and it's such an important part of your pitch.
Okay.
That
Sorry, guys.
I just
there you are.
Yeah.
Hey, go ahead.
Yeah. So I can. Yeah. And so I think I know what you're talking about. If you go back through that example, right, you'll see that there's average contract value is in there, right? How much? What's each contract worth? When do they occur? All right, put them in the Excel file, right? You'll see how many salespeople you need. You can put those in the Excel file and what they make, right? You can see when I've added value-added resellers, right? You can plug those in. You put the training in for those people. You can begin to populate this Excel file with these assumptions, and you're going to wind up with that a nice table that has some reasonably defensible projections on revenue and investment need.
And that is your preparation for
Exactly.
your pitch. I mean, because the discipline of going through those steps helps you answer every single question that comes up, and that's the stuff that really trips us up, or the folks that haven't put in the work. You can tell, because that's where they always come. So if you do those line items, like, okay, well, how many salespeople can we bring on? How do we make that decision? You just sit with your partners and think it through and say, well, which school district do we want to start with and why? Yeah. And you saw how Neil broke down you because you have an important sort of breakthrough on a piece of information that says our solution's not going to work with the really small or the big. So we just Neil Angel, just like what you found out about companies that were not keeping metrics, and you want to go with the financial services companies first, or the financial institutions. And so now do you want to go with the large ones, the biggest ones, the mid-sized ones, small ones, and a similar process? So then when you get up there, you can just clearly say, hey, there are 1,300 mid-sized financial institutions that this thing's going to work on best. Now you can really talk about the total addressable, not necessarily addressable, but maybe attainable market.
Angel,
and then
Angel, your market, I can segment your market in my head. Okay, I mean, it's not every business in the world, right? You can chunk it down, right? And you said you're going to go with financial services companies. Now, for example, maybe you only want to go after financial services businesses that already have a chief diversity officer. I don't know. Maybe even segment it down further. Maybe you don't want to go to a company that hasn't made that commitment. Maybe only a company. And you can find out, okay, what's their annual training budget? Oh, it's $500,000. And you can say, okay, well, I'm going to assume that 10% of that is going to go toward my kind of training. Well, there's your average contract value, $50,000. I think this is very, if you begin to think about it in a really granular way, you can get beyond the immensity of the problem of having to estimate market size and generate financial projections. So start with the trees, not the forest, right?
Yeah, I mean, the segmentation example that you gave was just great. I mean, I sat here taking so many notes. I know I can just go and do that.
Yeah, I mean, you could your market is really lends itself towards segmentation. Patrick's does with the various transportation related businesses and what the characteristics of each of those might be would allow you to then establish a hierarchy of where you're going to go first. I think. I mean, I think Patrick. But we talked about when we first came on my days at BFI, right? In the waste services business, right? So we had 400 districts. Okay, I think 80 of them were union, the rest were non-union. So if I'm segmenting your market, I'm immediately going to say I'm not going to talk to a BFI union district. Yeah. Only non-union, right? So so now I'm taking this big problem and starting to chunk it down into a smaller problem, and then really that's my target. That's my target market. I think it's you really.
And you're wiping out your objections that way, Patrick. It's like the folks that were in the discussion around the selection, right? Initially, that were like, well, there's going to be this union problem. It would never even have been there. It's like you just get to take all of the big objections to what they have. The one thing they're going to try to knock you out with is gone. You've already taken care of it.
So and you would say in your segment strategy, you'd say, I'm not going to even attempt to put drivers into a union trash company district till year 5. Not worth my time. Only going to do non-union. Well, that answers that question. Check that off, right?
Yeah.
I'm satisfied.
Off you go.
Yeah,
exactly.
As an investor. Yeah. Right.
Sorry. In my customer discovery, I learned that in addition to like individual companies that can be customers, there are these associations of companies, American Banking Association, the Opportunity Finance Network that works with CDFIs, and even other smaller ones, and they are really their membership is really kind of struggling with some of the issues that we addressed.
I'm sure they are, yeah.
And so I wondered if, the whole idea of like getting the best possible outcome for the least amount of work, idea of like, kind of targeting those associations. And I wonder how could I represent that, or, should I represent that in terms of like a TAM? Is it more about how many businesses are potentially within that association, or should that just be sort of a sales channel to other?
There's a good example. So to me, it's a different product line, right? And so you got to think through, okay, first of all, I'm guessing now that business that you would get through an association will probably be less profitable, right? Because you're going to have to give the association a deal, right? Number one. Number two, they probably buy in a different way. And you got to understand how they buy, right? It might be that you need a strategic partner to crack an association. Maybe you can't do it yourself. And number three, you're probably looking at a longer sales cycle, right? So it's going to take you a much longer time to close an association than an individual company. Those would all be things that would be reasonable expectations for me based on, prior experience. So I think then that becomes a segment specific strategy. That's what I think. And then you would ask yourself, based on those characteristics, do I want that to be my target segment, or do I want to delay that until year 2 after I've got 30 individual customers that I can use as sales proof statements, right? So I think it's a segment. That's what I think it is, because they behave differently as a buyer.
Yeah.
We always had, and most companies will have, they'll have a whole separate national accounts sales team, right? So if you want to get all the Taco Bells, that's one thing. If you want to get individual Taco Bells, that's a whole separate process, right? I think that association model is the same idea. Okay.
Okay.
But see, here's the thing. Let's say you're pitching an investor, and an investor says, "Well, Angel, why not just go out and get a contract with the ABC Association and get all their customers?" Well, rather than say that could be a good idea, you can say, "Great question. I thought about it. That's a year 2 thing. Here's why." Oh, okay. You know what you're doing, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So, any other questions, Angel? More, Neil? You got another couple of minutes?
I'm happy to hang in there till 1. Yeah, that's great. That's good. And look, you got my contact information, so I'm happy to do stuff
Dude,
one-on-one.
I know you are so busy, man.
Yeah, seriously.
I know you are. That's a kind offer. Because I mean, this presentation is so timely and so perfect, and we just right now need this. We are, running through the finish line in just a couple of weeks. We've got our pitch competition. This is, if you would go back to the slide with Harvard Business School around the what was it? The top.
Oh yeah, let me pull that up.
3 minutes and 44 seconds total, and then it had what are the top slides investors look at first is the financials.
I know.
And financials and team. I mean, it kind of stunned me because I didn't.
Is it back up again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's
while you're looking for that, Neil, in an opinion kind of question, why do you think team is so important? I noticed that that was the only 100%.
There you go.
That was in there. Was the team section.
That's a good question. So team is the only slide.
The only one that's 100%.
All 200 decks included. Okay. It was basically one page, right? So you see, it also shows you the number of pages they used. And
it's got the number of pages too.
And keep in mind, these are decks these are README decks. These are decks that are actually provided to the investor. These are not the pitch decks that you would use in okay, so that's why they're longer. All right. But it's literally it's like one page on average, 1.2 pages. I just think that investors want to know who they're dealing with, right? And I think that's why the team slides in every single one. They spend a lot of time on it, probably because they're thinking about who they know who knows you.
Okay. I see.
All right.
So is it the old story that they don't invest in ideas but people? I mean,
I think that's an oversimplification.
I
think that's oversimplification.
It's almost a quarter.
It's the jockey, not the horse. I think that's an oversimplification because I don't think a crummy idea in a small market gets invested in because the team is awesome. I just don't think. I think it's all the above. I used to have a guy who worked for me years ago who was really a lot of times a pain in the neck, but Rich would always say, Neil, it's never just one thing, right? And it's not. It's never just team. It's not just competition. It's not just financials. It's pretty much all this crap, right? And you can see
But I mean, you know, to see that you got financials, team, and then competition
Yeah.
is third.
I believe it. I believe it. Think
Wow.
about it, John.
Wow.
This is the first view, okay? This is the initial impression,
Yeah.
right? And what, right?
Wow.
It kind of makes sense, right? I think it does.
Yeah. It does. It does. It does make sense. I normally think of almost like problem solution and then go through it just because of my policy background. It's kind of like, you know, what's the problem? But I see
problem and solutions
this.
at the bottom. It looks like.
But you know, but
I know that's what I'm saying. I'm like I'm like a reverse of this whole
guys, think
thing.
about this. Like how many? Like, I'm not sure how many pitches you've actually sat through. I've sat through so many of them, and I want you to tell me the problem and solution in like 20 seconds. I do not want you to bludgeon me for 5 or 6 minutes on the problem and the solution. It drives me crazy. Tell me the problem. Tell me your solution. Now let's get to the competition, the team, the projections, right? How do you go to market? That's what I want to hear about. I don't want to be convinced for 5 minutes that failure to adhere to in-home stroke rehab is a problem. I know it's a problem. Just 12 seconds and I'm on board with you there, right? I'm on the team, all right? I believe you. So I think when I first ran across this, I was mesmerized by this information, and the more I thought about it, it reinforced my behavior as an investor. This is how I behave. Unfortunately,
dude, this is going to be very instructive for how we pitch, because you know, we had in our first practice, I mean, I was doing some timing, and the problem section or the story part, the things that showed up at the bottom of the list took, I know
you got to blow through that fast.
3, 4, 5 minutes, dude. I'm gonna tell you, it took 3, 4, 5 minutes.
Blow through that.
We gotta.
Let's say you're pitching me on a COVID-19 vaccine, right? Okay, that's like a 5-second problem statement. Do not give me 7 slides of graphs, right, of COVID infection rates. I get it. 5 seconds. Okay, great. COVID's a problem. Boom, move on. Keep moving. Come on, let's go. Right?
Okay.
So let me ask you something, just strategically, with social enterprise type problems.
Absolutely.
Same?
Absolutely. Look,
same.
Okay.
I like your advice. Thank you.
Coaching. I've done coaching now 3 years running over at the University of Maryland, Baltimore grid pitch competition. Those are mostly all social enterprises. Same comment. Do not give me 5 minutes on the one that comes to mind was the prevalence of addiction in Baltimore. I get it.
Yeah.
I'm there. I'm with you. Okay. That's 12 seconds. Seriously. 12 seconds.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Good stuff. Angel has another interesting question. You got 45 seconds to answer.
I saw that there was like,
I know.
6%. I was like, what? Which 4% of companies?
Yeah, and keep in mind these companies got funded. Okay, these are
paid.
I know. Companies that raised a total of $360 million. Okay, so maybe that's a reporting error. I don't know, but that is a little bit weird that they didn't talk about their product. But who knows, right? Who knows? But these companies they walked away with checks. Okay, so that's the backdrop. Okay.
Yeah. Neil, you as always have just provided so much good information and insight. The session, just a killer session again, and we will share your contact info. I know you are extraordinarily busy, but this is so important to the process of raising capital and really getting the pitch right and understanding what really focus your attention. And so
happy to
thank you
help. And look,
so much
if you want to somehow
again
drag
for-
me into the, I'll be happy to look at maybe do some pitch feedback if there's a way to do that.
Dude,
So
well, yes, there is. I'll do that, and plus, definitely come back. No, come back
Okay.
during the closing ceremony,
Yeah,
and
I'd
I
love
want
to.
you to see the group when we finish
Okay.
we finish our practice. So I want you to
Deal.
see it at the
Okay.
end, because everybody's working their tail off, and this is great. So thank you again.
Happy to do
It's
it.
a wonderful time. We will see you, and everybody else, I will talk to y'all at our one-on-ones, and have a great afternoon, folks.